I'm Diana Westbrook, 36 years old, and tonight my husband of 8 years just called me a failure in front of a crowded restaurant. What Marcus doesn't know is that the waiter who overheard him, the one now standing frozen with our anniversary champagne, is actually Trevor Santos, the vice president of operations at my tech company. The same company Marcus thinks I'm barely holding onto a junior position at. The same company where I'm actually the founder and CEO. But let me back up, because this moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It's the culmination of years of careful silence, strategic omissions, and my own complicated reasons for letting the man I married believe I'm someone I'm not. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My journey into tech entrepreneurship started in the most unglamorous way possible, debugging code in a cramped studio apartment at 2 in the morning while surviving on instant ramen and black coffee. I was 24, fresh out of a computer science program at a state university nobody had heard of, and working as a junior developer at a mid-sized software firm that treated its employees like interchangeable parts. The pay was decent enough to cover rent and student loans with almost nothing left over, but the work was soul-crushing. We built inventory management systems for retail chains, the kind of back-end software that keeps the world running but never gets acknowledged or appreciated. I'd always been the kid who took apart electronics to see how they worked, who taught herself Python at 13, who spent lunch periods in the computer lab instead of the cafeteria. My parents, both schoolteachers in a small town outside Pittsburgh, supported my interests even though they didn't fully understand them. My mother once asked if I was going to be one of those people who fixes computers at the mall, and I didn't have the heart to explain that software engineering was different. They were proud when I graduated, prouder still when I got my first real job, and they framed my acceptance letter like it was a diploma. But I wanted more than just a steady paycheck and decent benefits. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that solved real problems for real people. The idea came to me during one of those late-night coding sessions when I was 3 energy drinks deep and my eyes were burning from screen fatigue. I was helping my younger sister navigate the disaster that was college financial aid applications, watching her drown in confusing forms and contradictory requirements, missing deadlines because the information was scattered across a dozen different websites and buried in incomprehensible bureaucratic language. That's when it hit me. What if there was a platform that simplified the entire process? Not just for financial aid, but for everything related to higher education accessibility. Scholarship applications, grant opportunities, work-study programs, all aggregated in one place with an intelligent algorithm that matched students to opportunities based on their specific circumstances. A system that didn't just collect information but actually helped people navigate one of the most stressful and consequential decisions of their lives. I spent the next 6 months building the prototype while still working my day job. My studio apartment became mission control, every surface covered with notes and diagrams, whiteboards propped against walls covered in flowcharts and user experience sketches. I called it Bridgepoint, because it was meant to bridge the gap between students who needed help and the resources that existed but were impossible to find. The first version was rough, held together with duct tape and determination, but it worked. More importantly, when I showed it to my sister and her friends, they actually wanted to use it. Getting funding was harder than building the product. I pitched to 17 venture capital firms before I found one willing to take a chance on a woman from a no-name school with no business experience and no connections. They gave me barely enough to quit my job and hire 2 contractors, but it was enough. That was 11 years ago, and Bridgepoint is now valued at $420 million. We've helped over 3 million students access education funding they wouldn't have found otherwise. We've partnered with 2,000 universities and processed over $8 billion in financial aid applications. But Marcus doesn't know any of this. To him, I'm Diana, the woman he met at a mutual friend's barbecue 7 years ago, who mentioned she worked in tech doing something with websites or apps or whatever. He never asked for details, and I never offered them. At the time, it felt like a relief. I'd just gone through a brutal breakup with someone who couldn't handle my success, who made every dinner conversation into a competition, who introduced me at parties by mentioning his job first and mine as an afterthought if at all. When Marcus showed interest in me as a person rather than as a resume, when he talked about books and travel and his work as a physical therapist without ever asking what my title was or how much equity I held, It felt like breathing fresh air after being underground. Our early dates were simple and wonderful. We went hiking in the mountains outside the city, had picnics in the park, spent Saturday mornings at farmers' markets picking out vegetables we'd cooked together that night. He told me about his dream of eventually opening his own sports medicine practice, about the satisfaction he got from helping people recover from injuries and regain mobility. I told him about my work in vague terms, helping students with college stuff, and he seemed genuinely interested in the mission without caring about the business metrics or valuation. When he introduced me to his family, I was just Diana, his girlfriend who worked in education technology. His parents, Gerald and Patricia Hammond, came from a comfortable middle-class background. Gerald was a retired high school principal, Patricia a former nurse who now volunteered at a community health clinic. They were warm and welcoming, the kind of people who asked about your day and actually listened to the answer. They had strong opinions about work-life balance and the importance of service over profit, and they worried aloud that Marcus worked too many hours at the hospital where he was employed. At that first family dinner, Patricia asked what I did for work. Before I could answer properly, Marcus jumped in with, "Diana helps students figure out college financial aid. It's really meaningful work but obviously not as financially rewarding as those big tech companies." His mother nodded approvingly, saying how nice it was that I'd chosen purpose over profit, and his father launched into a story about a former student who'd struggled to afford college. I opened my mouth to clarify, to explain that Bridgepoint was actually a significant company, that I'd built it from nothing, that we were financially successful precisely because we'd solved a real problem. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the approval in Patricia's eyes, the way she seemed to relax once she thought I wasn't one of those Silicon Valley types she'd read about in articles about income inequality and tech excess. Maybe it was Marcus squeezing my hand under the table, a gesture that felt like gratitude. Maybe it was my own exhaustion with being defined by my success, with the way people's entire demeanor changed when they learned I was a founder and CEO, how conversations shifted from genuine to transactional. So I let the misunderstanding stand. I told myself it was temporary, that once they knew me better, once Marcus and I were more serious, I'd clarify the full picture. Instead, that temporary omission became the foundation of our relationship. The woman Marcus fell in love with was a simplified version of me, someone who worked a respectable but modest job in tech, who was passionate about education access but not particularly ambitious or driven in business terms, who could be a supportive partner without threatening his own professional identity. The deception, if you could call it that, wasn't entirely one-sided. Marcus had his own careful presentations and strategic omissions. He talked about his work at the hospital but downplayed the politics and frustrations, about his dream of private practice but not about the business plan he'd been working on for years or his specific income goals. We both curated versions of ourselves that fit comfortably together, that didn't create friction or competition. For a while, it felt like a relief. We got engaged after 18 months of dating, married 6 months after that in a small ceremony at a botanical garden with close family and friends. I wore a simple dress from a department store, not designer, because that's what the Diana of Marcus's understanding would do. We honeymooned in Costa Rica for a week, a trip I secretly paid for but structured to look like we'd both contributed equally. I was becoming an expert at managing perceptions, at living this double life where I ran a multi-million-dollar company by day and played the role of modestly successful tech worker by night. The cognitive dissonance was manageable at first. Bridgepoint had a capable executive team, and I'd learned to delegate effectively. I could attend board meetings in the morning and have dinner with Marcus's parents in the evening, code switching between CEO Diana and wife Diana without too much strain. But as time passed, the gap between my two lives widened. Bridgepoint expanded into new markets, we opened international offices, I was invited to speak at conferences and quoted in major publications. All of this happened under my real name, but Marcus existed in a bubble where he didn't follow tech news or read industry publications, where my world and his never intersected. His parents certainly didn't follow the tech industry. They got their news from local television and the Sunday paper, and they had no reason to connect Diana Westbrook, CEO mentioned in a Forbes article about education technology disruption, with their son's wife Diana who worked on college financial aid websites. The separation of my professional and personal identities was complete, and maintaining it required constant vigilance. I set up separate social media accounts, one under a slight variation of my name for professional use and one personal account that looked like any other normal person's feed with photos of hiking trips and home-cooked meals. I was careful never to discuss specific work details around Marcus, keeping conversations vague about projects and challenges. When Bridgepoint won a major industry award 2 years into our marriage, I attended the ceremony alone, telling Marcus I had a work conference that weekend. I gave my acceptance speech to a room full of industry leaders and investors, then flew home and helped Marcus's mother with her community clinic fundraiser the next day. The lying by omission weighed on me, but I justified it with various rationales. Marcus seemed happy with our life as it was, and introducing the full reality of my career would only complicate things. His parents already approved of me, and explaining that their understanding was based on incomplete information would embarrass everyone. I was protecting the relationship, I told myself, maintaining peace and stability rather than introducing unnecessary complexity. But underneath all those justifications was a more uncomfortable truth I didn't want to examine too closely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd watched how Marcus reacted when his younger sister got a promotion at her marketing firm. The way his congratulations had a sharp edge to it, the comment he made later about her becoming too ambitious and losing perspective. I'd noticed how he talked about successful women in the news, always finding ways to diminish their achievements or question their priorities. I'd seen the pattern, and some part of me knew that revealing my success would fundamentally change how he saw me, and not in a good way. The cracks started showing about 3 years into our marriage. Marcus had finally left the hospital and opened his own practice, Hammond Sports Medicine, in a decent location with 2 other physical therapists. It was exactly what he'd dreamed about, except the reality of running a small business was far more stressful than he'd anticipated. Insurance paperwork, scheduling challenges, difficult patients, marketing costs, the constant anxiety about making payroll and covering overhead. He brought home these frustrations every night, and I listened and sympathized while privately thinking about solutions I could offer if I could be honest about my experience building and scaling a company. But I couldn't offer that expertise without explaining where it came from, so instead I made supportive noises and asked gentle questions, offering suggestions carefully framed as things I'd read online or heard from friends. Marcus sometimes took the advice, sometimes dismissed it as unrealistic or oversimplified. His stress was affecting our relationship, making him irritable and distant, but it also made him feel like we were equal struggling with similar work challenges, which seemed to comfort him. Around this time, I noticed him starting to make comments about my work, little digs that seemed to come from nowhere. We'd be watching TV and a commercial for some tech company would come on, and he'd say something like, "At least you work for a company that actually helps people instead of just chasing profit." Or we'd be at dinner with friends and someone would mention their job stress, and Marcus would chime in with, "Diana's lucky. Her work is pretty low pressure compared to healthcare or business ownership." Each comment was small enough that calling it out would seem petty, but together they created a narrative where my work was nice but not particularly demanding or important. I told myself he was just processing his own stress, that he didn't mean anything by it. But the comments continued and escalated. When I came home tired from a particularly brutal day of putting out fires, dealing with a security breach and a major client threatening to leave, Marcus said, "Must be nice to be tired from sitting at a computer all day. Imagine being on your feet actually helping people." When I mentioned needing to travel for work, he sighed and said, "I guess your website stuff is more important than being here to support my practice." The worst part was that I couldn't defend myself without revealing everything. I couldn't say, actually, I was in back-to-back crisis meetings managing a company with 300 employees across 4 countries. I couldn't explain that my job was incredibly demanding and high stakes, that people's livelihoods depended on the decisions I made, that the pressure was immense and constant. So instead I apologized, I minimized my own needs, I made myself smaller to avoid conflict. His parents picked up on this dynamic and amplified it. At family dinners, Patricia would ask how Marcus's practice was doing with genuine interest and concern, spending 20 minutes discussing his challenges and successes. Then she'd turn to me almost as an afterthought and say, "And how's your work going, dear?" in a tone that expected and wanted a simple, "Fine," in response. Gerald started making comments about how impressed he was with Marcus for taking the entrepreneurial risk of opening his own practice, while looking at me and saying, I'm sure it's nice having the stability of a regular job at an established company, less stressful than what Marcus is dealing with. I wanted to scream. I wanted to explain that I was the one who'd taken the real entrepreneurial risk, who'd built something from absolute nothing, who dealt with the kind of stress that came from having hundreds of people depending on you for their income and millions of users depending on you for access to education. But the web of deception I'd woven was too complete. Revealing the truth now would mean explaining years of omissions and misdirections, and I couldn't imagine that conversation going well. So I played along, and with each passing month I felt more trapped in the role I'd created. Marcus's comments became more frequent and more pointed. When I got a bonus at work, something I couldn't hide because it affected our joint finances, he made a joke about playing in the shallow end of the tech pool, where even modest players got decent money. When I stayed late at the office several nights running to handle a product launch crisis, he accused me of hiding at work to avoid dealing with real life. The breaking point came 6 months ago when Marcus was having a particularly rough week. A key therapist at his practice quit unexpectedly, leaving him scrambling to cover appointments. Insurance had denied several major claims, creating a cash flow crisis. A competitor opened a new clinic 3 blocks away with better equipment and more aggressive marketing. He came home each night, wounds so tight I could practically see him vibrating with stress, and nothing I said or did seemed to help. One evening, I came home from my own terrible day to find Marcus in our home office, head in his hands, surrounded by paperwork. I'd just fired someone on my leadership team for ethics violations, a situation that was legally complex and emotionally draining. I'd been in meetings with lawyers all day, and I was exhausted and heartsick. But I pushed my own problems aside and asked Marcus what was wrong. He looked up at me with actual anger in his eyes. What's wrong? My business is falling apart. I'm working 80-hour weeks and barely breaking even. I have employees depending on me and patients who need care, and I have no idea if I can keep the doors open another 6 months. He gestured at the papers scattered across the desk. But you wouldn't understand that kind of pressure, would you? You just show up, do your little website maintenance or whatever it is, collect your paycheck, and go home. I felt something crack inside me. That's not fair, Marcus. You know I care about your success. I've been trying to help. Help? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. How exactly do you help? By listening and nodding? By telling me everything will be fine? You have no idea what it takes to actually build something, to be responsible for other people's livelihoods. He stood up, pacing now. I thought when I married you that at least I'd have a supportive partner, someone who understood that real work matters more than just coasting along in some cushy tech job. I should have told him then. Should have laid out the truth and dealt with the consequences. Instead, I absorbed the blow, internalized the criticism, and tried harder to be the supportive wife he seemed to need. I took over more household responsibilities to free up his time. I stopped mentioning my own work challenges entirely. I made myself as small and undemanding as possible, hoping that would ease the tension between us. It didn't work. Marcus's resentment seemed to grow rather than diminish. He started making comments in front of other people, testing boundaries. At a dinner party with other couples, someone asked me about my work and Marcus jumped in before I could answer, saying, "Diana does something with education technology, helps students fill out forms online. It's not very exciting but it pays the bills." The dismissiveness in his tone made everyone at the table uncomfortable, but no one knew what to say. His friend Kevin tried to be diplomatic. "Hey, working in education is great, making a difference is what matters." Marcus nodded but added, "Sure, though it's not exactly building a real business or anything. Some of us take actual risks while others play it safe." The conversation moved on quickly, but I sat there feeling humiliated and angry, trapped in a cage of my own making. That was 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, Marcus suggested we go out for our 8th anniversary, to a nice restaurant downtown called Constellation. I was surprised, given how strained things had been, but I agreed, hoping maybe a special evening might reset things between us, give us a chance to reconnect away from the daily stress. I had no idea that dinner would become the moment everything finally exploded. I spent extra time getting ready, wearing a dress I'd had for years but rarely had occasion to wear, doing my hair and makeup carefully. When Marcus emerged from the bedroom in a suit, looking handsome and put together, I felt a surge of hope that maybe we could find our way back to who we'd been at the beginning. Maybe tonight we could remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. The drive downtown was quiet but not uncomfortable. Marcus put on music we both liked, and for a few minutes in the car, it felt like old times. We found parking and walked into Constellation hand in hand. The restaurant was beautiful, all exposed brick and soft lighting, with tables spaced far enough apart for intimate conversation but close enough that you could hear the pleasant hum of other diners around you. The host checked our reservation and led us to a table near the window with a view of the city lights. Our waiter approached, and I glanced up to thank him, then froze. Trevor Santos was standing there with menus in hand, dressed in the restaurant service uniform, looking just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. Trevor Santos, my vice president of operations, the person who ran the day-to-day business of Bridgepoint alongside our CFO while I focused on strategy and growth, was standing at our table holding leather-bound menus and a wine list. For a split second, we just stared at each other, both processing this impossible situation. Trevor recovered first, his face smoothing into professional neutrality, though I could see the question in his eyes. He gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, and I understood he was following my lead on how to handle this. Marcus hadn't noticed anything unusual. He was studying his phone, checking one last message before putting it away for dinner. Trevor set down the menus with practiced ease and launched into his greeting, his voice perfectly calibrated to sound like any other server. "Good evening, welcome to Constellation. My name is Trevor and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink, perhaps some wine to celebrate the occasion?" I knew Trevor had worked in restaurants to put himself through college, that he'd actually managed a high-end establishment before transitioning into tech operations, but seeing him here was still surreal. Then it clicked. His partner, Michael, was the executive chef here. I'd met Michael once at a company holiday party where partners were invited. Trevor must have been helping out tonight, maybe they were short-staffed, maybe he did this occasionally to stay connected to the industry he'd left behind. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was that Trevor knew exactly who I was, and Marcus had no idea that our waiter could expose my entire elaborate deception with a single sentence. Marcus looked up from his phone and smiled at Trevor, oblivious. "We're celebrating our anniversary. 8 years. Do you have a good champagne?" "Nothing too expensive, we're not made of money, but something decent to mark the occasion." Trevor glanced at me briefly, and I could practically see him calculating. "Of course, congratulations. I have several excellent options in the mid-range. May I suggest the Perrier Jouet? It's celebration-worthy without being excessive." His word choice was careful, matching the financial parameters Marcus had set without being condescending about it. "Sounds perfect," Marcus said, finally putting his phone in his pocket. "Let's do that." Trevor nodded and departed to retrieve the champagne, and I tried to regulate my breathing. This was fine. Trevor was a professional in every sense of the word. He understood discretion. He wouldn't say anything inappropriate. I just needed to get through this dinner without Marcus noticing anything strange. Except my hands were trembling slightly as I picked up the menu, and my mind was racing through worst-case scenarios instead of reading the appetizer descriptions. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, and for a moment he was the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who could be warm and attentive when he chose to be. "I know things have been rough lately," he said, and he sounded sincere. "Work stress has made me difficult to live with. I wanted tonight to be special, just us, remembering what matters." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a complicated mix of hope and dread. I've missed this. Missed us. It was true, despite everything. Underneath all the resentment and miscommunication and my own web of lies, there was still love, or at least the memory of it strong enough to feel like the real thing. Trevor returned with the champagne, performing the ritual of showing Marcus the label, opening the bottle with a subtle pop, pouring a taste for approval. Marcus went through the motions, nodded his satisfaction, and Trevor filled both our glasses with elegant precision. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu," he said, and disappeared again before Marcus could register that this level of service seemed unusually attentive for a mid-range restaurant on a Wednesday night. We clinked glasses and I took a sip, the bubbles sharp and bright on my tongue. Marcus started talking about a new piece of equipment he wanted to purchase for the practice, explaining the technical benefits in detail, and I listened with genuine interest. This was the Marcus I recognized, passionate about his work, knowledgeable and articulate when discussing his field. When he talked about patient outcomes and treatment innovations, the bitterness fell away and I could see why I'd married him. We ordered appetizers when Trevor returned, then entrees. The food was exceptional, Michael's culinary skills evident in every dish. Marcus seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself, the tension in his shoulders gradually releasing as the champagne and good food worked their magic. We talked about a vacation we were planning, about his sister's new baby, about a book I'd been reading. It was pleasant, normal, the kind of anniversary dinner I'd hoped we could have. Then Marcus's phone buzzed. He apologized and checked it, his expression darkening. It's the practice. The alarm system is glitching again. Third time this month. He typed out a response, his earlier good mood evaporating. I swear, everything in that place is falling apart. The alarm, the HVAC, the scheduling software. And I can't afford to replace any of it because we're barely making payroll. I tried to be sympathetic. I know it's been stressful. But you're building something solid. These are just growing pains. He set his phone down harder than necessary. Growing pains. Right. Easy to say when you don't actually understand what it takes to run a business. The edge was back in his voice, the same resentment I'd been hearing for months. You show up to an office someone else manages, do your assigned tasks, collect a paycheck. You have no idea what real business ownership entails. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. That's not fair, Marcus. Just because I work differently doesn't mean I don't understand professional challenges. Differently. He laughed, reaching for his champagne. That's diplomatic. You work at a tech company doing data entry or whatever it is. I'm building something from the ground up, taking actual financial risks, responsible for actual people's jobs. There's no comparison. Data entry. The words hit me like a slap. After all these years, that's what he thought I did. Data entry. I opened my mouth to respond, but he wasn't finished. You know what the problem is? Marcus continued, his voice getting louder. You've never had to really fight for anything. You got your little tech job right out of college and you've coasted ever since. Meanwhile, I'm working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing everything to build something that matters, and I get no support at home because my wife can't comprehend what real ambition looks like. Other diners were starting to glance in our direction. I could feel their attention even though I wasn't looking at them directly. My face was burning with humiliation and anger. Marcus, lower your voice. People are staring. Let them stare. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine. I'm tired of coming home to someone who nods and smiles but fundamentally doesn't understand what I'm going through. He finished his champagne and set the glass down with a sharp clink. You want to know the truth? Sometimes I wonder if I married the wrong person. Someone with actual drive, someone who took real risks in their career, they'd understand what I'm dealing with. But you? He shook his head. You're comfortable with mediocrity. You're a failure at ambition, Diana. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and irrevocable. A failure at ambition. I sat frozen, unable to process that my husband had just called me a failure in the middle of a crowded restaurant on our anniversary. The champagne I'd been drinking turned sour in my stomach. Trevor appeared at our table, and I realized he'd been standing a few feet away, had heard everything Marcus just said. His face was carefully neutral but his jaw was tight, and I could see the anger in his eyes even though he was suppressing it professionally. He was holding our entrees but had stopped approaching when Marcus started his tirade. He came forward now and set down our plates with exaggerated care, his movements controlled in a way that suggested he was working very hard not to say something. Your dinners, he said, his voice flat. Can I get you anything else right now? Marcus didn't even look at him, just waved him away dismissively. "We're fine." But Trevor didn't leave. He stood there for a beat too long, and I looked up at him, silently pleading with my eyes. "Don't say anything. Please don't say anything. This is bad enough without adding that complication." Trevor met my gaze, and something passed between us, some understanding or decision. He gave the smallest nod and walked away, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Marcus cut into his steak aggressively. Can you believe that? Waiter just hovering there. Probably hoping for a better tip. He took a bite, chewed, seemed completely unaware that he'd just detonated our marriage in a public space. This is good, at least. Food's decent here. I looked down at my plate, some kind of fish with vegetables that probably tasted amazing, and felt absolutely no desire to eat any of it. My appetite had vanished the moment Marcus called me a failure. I picked up my fork mechanically, moved food around, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk out. Part of me wanted to tell him everything right here, right now, consequences be damned. Part of me just wanted to disappear. "You're not eating," Marcus observed, not sounding particularly concerned. "I thought you liked fish." "I've lost my appetite," I said quietly. He sighed, the sound heavy with irritation. "Don't be dramatic, Diana. I'm just being honest. Someone has to be. We can't keep pretending you have some demanding career when the reality is you've settled for comfortable obscurity. Maybe if you pushed yourself more, took some actual risks, you'd understand what I'm trying to build." Every word was a knife. The worst part was that he genuinely believed what he was saying. He'd constructed this entire narrative about who I was based on incomplete information and his own insecurities, and then blamed me for not living up to his imagined version of ambition. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Trevor returned to check on us, his expression still rigidly professional. "How is everything? Are your meals satisfactory?" "It's fine," Marcus said, still not really looking at him. Then, as Trevor started to turn away, Marcus added, "Actually, you can relate to this. You work in service, right? Decent job, nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. Do you ever feel like you've settled? Like you could have pushed for something bigger but took the safe route instead?" I closed my eyes, mortification washing over me. He was doing this to our waiter now, dragging a stranger into his narrative about professional mediocrity. When I opened my eyes, Trevor was looking at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between pity and contempt. "I'm satisfied with my career choices," Trevor said evenly. "I found that the most important thing is working with integrity and purpose, regardless of how others perceive the role." Sure, Marcus said dismissively. "But don't you ever wonder what it would be like to actually build something? To take real risks instead of just serving other people's accomplishments?" Trevor's pause was deliberate. I could see him weighing his words, deciding how far to go. "Sir, I think you'd be surprised what people accomplish that isn't immediately visible. Some of the most successful people I know are remarkably humble about their achievements. They don't feel the need to broadcast their accomplishments or diminish others to feel significant." It was the most subtle rebuke possible, delivered with perfect service industry politeness, but the point landed. Marcus's face reddened slightly. I wasn't asking for a philosophy lesson. Just making conversation. "Of course," Trevor said smoothly. "Please enjoy your meals." He walked away before Marcus could say anything else, and I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and horror that my VP had just witnessed my marriage imploding in real time. Marcus ate his steak in tense silence for a few minutes, then looked at me with what might have been remorse or might have been irritation that I wasn't moving past his comments as quickly as he'd like. "Look, I didn't mean to ruin dinner. I'm just frustrated with everything right now. The practice, the finances, all of it. And it feels like you can't relate because you've never been in this position. Because you've never let me," I said quietly. "You've never asked about my work in any detail. You've made assumptions based on nothing and then criticized me for not living up to expectations I didn't even know existed." "What are you talking about?" "I know what you do. You work at some education tech company, help students with financial aid applications, make decent money but nothing extraordinary. That's what you've always told me. I told you I work in education technology helping students access financial aid, I corrected him. I never said I was just processing applications or making modest money. You assumed that. And honestly, Marcus, I let you assume it because somewhere along the way I realized you needed to believe I was less successful than you. But I'm tired. I'm tired of being small to make you comfortable. He set down his fork, looking genuinely confused now. What does that even mean? Are you trying to say your job is more important than I thought? Are you, what, a senior data analyst or something? The absurdity of that guess would have made me laugh if I wasn't so angry and hurt. A senior data analyst. That was the height of what he could imagine for me. I looked at him across the table, this man I'd shared a life with for 8 years, and realized he didn't actually know me at all. He knew the version of me I'd performed for his comfort, but the real Diana, the one who'd built a company from scratch and fought her way through an impossible industry, she was a complete stranger to him. We need to talk, I said. But not here. Let's finish this dinner or not finish it, get the check, and go home. We need to have a real conversation. A conversation about what? Your job title? He was getting defensive now, sensing something shifting but not understanding what. Diana, you're overreacting to some comments I made in frustration. I'm under a lot of stress. Can't you cut me some slack? You called me a failure, I said, keeping my voice low but letting the anger show. On our anniversary. In public. You dismissed my entire career, which you know nothing about, and used me as your punching bag for your own insecurities. That's not stress, Marcus. That's cruelty. His face went through several expressions, surprise, defensiveness, guilt, landing finally on justification. I didn't call you a failure. I said you were comfortable with mediocrity, which is different. And maybe if you were more open about your work, I'd understand it better. But you're always so vague about what you do. I almost told him then. Almost laid it all out right there at the table. But Trevor was approaching again, and I realized with a start that he was carrying dessert menus, which meant he'd seen enough of this disaster to know we weren't finishing our entrees and was trying to give us an exit strategy. Can I interest you in dessert or coffee? Trevor asked, his tone suggesting he absolutely understood if we wanted to get out of there immediately. Or I can bring your check whenever you're ready. Check, Marcus and I said simultaneously. Trevor nodded and disappeared again, returning quickly with the leather folder containing our bill. He set it down exactly between us, not making any assumptions about who would be paying. Marcus reached for it automatically, pulled out his credit card, and handed it back to Trevor without looking at the total, a power move that was supposed to demonstrate confidence but came across as careless given his earlier complaints about money. Trevor processed the payment and returned with the receipt for signature. As Marcus was signing, adding what I could see was a barely adequate tip, Trevor looked directly at me for the first time since the dinner had gone sideways. I hope the rest of your evening improves, he said, and the emphasis on improves made it clear he was speaking to me specifically, not to Marcus or to us as a couple. Thank you, I said, meeting his eyes. For everything. He gave a small nod and left us to gather our things. Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket, apparently ready to pretend the last hour hadn't happened. I followed him out of the restaurant in silence, my mind already spinning ahead to the conversation we were about to have at home, the one that would either save or end our marriage. The drive back was excruciating. Marcus tried several times to start light conversation, apparently having decided that if he acted like everything was normal, it would become normal. I responded with monosyllables, staring out the window, watching the city lights blur past. My phone buzzed in my purse, probably Trevor checking if I was okay, but I ignored it. Everything could wait until Marcus and I dealt with what had just happened. We pulled into our driveway and walked into the house in continued silence. Marcus headed for the bedroom, loosening his tie, still apparently under the impression that we were just going to go to sleep and pretend tomorrow that tonight hadn't happened. I followed him but stopped in the doorway. We need to talk now, I said. He turned, already halfway out of his jacket. Diana, it's late. I said things I shouldn't have said. I apologize. Can we just move past this and get some sleep? I have early appointments tomorrow. No, I said simply. We can't move past this. Not this time. Something in my tone must have registered because he stopped undressing and looked at me with actual attention. Okay. What do you want to talk about? I came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to figure out where to even start. You called me a failure tonight. You said I've settled for mediocrity. You've been making comments for months about how I don't understand real work, real ambition, real risk. And all of it is based on an understanding of my career that is fundamentally wrong. So enlighten me, he said, and there was challenge in his voice. Tell me what I'm missing about your job at whatever that company is called. What's the big secret? Bridgepoint, I said. The company is called Bridgepoint. And I don't work there, Marcus. I founded it. 11 years ago, when I was 25 years old. I built it from scratch. From a prototype I coded in my studio apartment into a platform that serves 3 million students and processes $8 billion in financial aid applications annually. We have 300 employees across 4 countries. The company is currently valued at $420 million. I'm not an employee. I'm the founder and CEO. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stood frozen with his tie half undone, staring at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, he managed, What? I'm the founder and CEO of Bridgepoint, I repeated, each word clear and deliberate. I have been for 11 years. It's not a small education nonprofit. It's a major tech company that happened to focus on education accessibility. The work you've been dismissing as data entry or form processing is actually running a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He sat down heavily in the chair by the window, still staring at me. That's not possible. I would know. You would have told me. When we met, you said you worked in education technology. I did say that. It was technically true. I never lied to you, Marcus. I just never corrected your assumptions when you decided that meant I had some mid-level job at someone else's company. And then when I realized you preferred believing I was less successful than you, when your whole family seemed more comfortable with me being modestly employed, I let it continue. I stopped fighting to be seen because it was easier than dealing with your insecurity. His face was going through rapid changes, confusion, disbelief, anger. You're saying you've been lying to me for our entire relationship? Pretending to be someone you're not? I'm saying I've been hiding parts of myself because you made it clear, over and over, that you couldn't handle the full picture. Every time I tried to talk about work challenges, you dismissed them. Every time I achieved something significant, I had to pretend it was small and unimportant. I made myself smaller and smaller to fit into the box of who you needed me to be. He stood up abruptly, pacing now. No. No, you don't get to make this my fault. If what you're saying is true, and I'm not sure I believe you, but if it's true, then you've been running some elaborate deception for years. That's on you, Diana. Don't blame me for your lies. They weren't lies, I said, feeling my own anger rising. They were omissions, carefully constructed to protect your ego. Because I loved you, and I thought if I just gave you space to feel successful without competing with me, we could make it work. But it didn't work, did it? It made you resent me anyway, resent this imagined version of me that you created. Marcus stopped pacing and pulled out his phone, fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Bridgepoint. Let me look this up. He was silent for a long moment, reading, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock. This says the founder and CEO is Diana Westbrook. That's you. There are photos of you at conferences, accepting awards, being interviewed. He looked up at me, his face pale. This is real. You actually built this company. I nodded, feeling strangely calm now that the truth was finally out. I told you. I wasn't exaggerating or making it up. That's who I am, who I've been this entire time. He sat back down, the phone still in his hand, scrolling through articles. There's a Forbes profile here from 3 years ago. It says you were on the cover. How did I never see this? How did no one tell me? His voice was rising again, but this time with a different quality, less anger and more something like panic. Because we live in separate worlds, Marcus. You don't follow tech news or read industry publications. Your family gets their information from local TV and the Sunday paper. And I was very, very careful to keep my professional and personal lives completely separate. Different social media accounts, attending events alone, never discussing specific details around you or your family. I paused, letting that sink in. I became an expert at being two different people. He was shaking his head, still processing. That waiter tonight. The one I was talking to about settling and taking the safe route. Did he know? Was he in on this somehow? Trevor Santos, I said. He's my vice president of operations. He and his partner own the restaurant. Michael is the executive chef. Trevor was probably helping out tonight, and yes, he knew exactly who I was. He heard everything you said to me. About me being a failure, about not understanding real work, all of it. My VP heard my husband call me mediocre on our anniversary. Marcus's face flushed deep red, whether from embarrassment or anger I couldn't tell. So you humiliated me. Let me make a fool of myself in front of your employee. I didn't let you do anything, I said sharply. You chose to belittle me in public. You chose to make assumptions about my work without ever asking real questions. Trevor was professional enough to stay silent, which is more than you deserved. Why? Marcus asked, and his voice cracked slightly. Why hide this from me? If you built something this successful, why not tell me? Why let me believe you were just some mid-level employee? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet street, the houses with their lit windows full of other couples having their own complicated lives. Because the first time I brought you to meet your parents, your mother made it clear she disapproved of ambitious career women. Because you introduced me as someone who works in hospitality, deliberately vague, and you looked relieved when they didn't ask follow-up questions. Because I'd just ended a relationship with someone who couldn't handle my success, and you seemed different. You seemed interested in me as a person, not as a resume. I turned back to face him. And then, over time, I saw how you reacted to other successful women. Your comments about your sister getting too ambitious, the way you talked about women CEOs in the news, always finding ways to diminish their achievements. I realized that if I told you the truth, everything would change. You'd either feel threatened and pull away, or you'd suddenly see me differently in a way that wasn't really about me. So I kept quiet, and it became easier to just keep being quiet. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. So what happens now? You've exposed me as an idiot who didn't know his own wife. You've proven you're more successful than I'll ever be. What do you want, applause? I want honesty, I said. From both of us. I want to know if there's any version of this marriage that can survive the truth. Because I can't go back to being that other Diana, the one who makes herself small and accepts your resentment. I'm done with that. He stood up and walked past me out of the bedroom. I heard him in the kitchen, the sound of cabinet doors opening, a glass being filled. When he came back, he had water, not alcohol, which was something. He sat on the bed where I'd been sitting earlier, looking exhausted. I need time, he said finally. I need to process this. All of it. The deception, the reality of who you actually are, what this means for us. He looked up at me. Can you understand that? Can you give me space to figure out how I feel about being married to someone I apparently don't know? Yes, I said. But I need something too. I need you to acknowledge that your behavior tonight, and for months before tonight, was wrong. Regardless of what you thought I did for a living, you had no right to call me a failure or to dismiss my work as meaningless. That wasn't about my actual career. That was about your need to feel superior. His jaw clenched, but after a moment he nodded. You're right. I've been taking my stress and insecurity out on you. Trying to make myself feel better by putting you down. That was wrong. He paused. But you have to acknowledge that lying by omission for years, letting me build a life with someone who wasn't real, that was wrong too. I do, I said quietly. I thought I was protecting our relationship, but I was really just avoiding conflict. We both made choices that got us here. The conversation wound down into logistics. Marcus said he'd stay in the guest room for now, that we'd figure out next steps after we both had time to think. I agreed, feeling numb and exhausted. As he gathered his things and left the bedroom, I sat alone in the silence, wondering if this marriage could be salvaged or if tonight had broken something irreparable. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked at it. Trevor had sent a message, "Are you okay? I'm sorry I was there for that. Let me know if you need anything." I typed back, I told him everything. Not sure what happens next, but thank you for your discretion tonight. His response came quickly, "Whatever you need, we've got your back." The whole team does. The next morning, I called my lawyer and my therapist, setting up appointments for later in the week. Marcus left early for his practice without saying goodbye. I went to the office and called an emergency meeting with my leadership team, Trevor, our CFO Rachel, and our Chief Technology Officer Dev. I explained what had happened, that my personal life had intersected with my professional life in an unexpected way, and that there might be some fallout to manage. "Does this change anything about the company?" Rachel asked, ever practical. "No," I said firmly. "This is personal. But I wanted you all to know in case, I don't know, in case anything comes up that affects my ability to lead effectively." Trevor spoke up. "For what it's worth, what I witnessed last night only